Good evening to you all. Actually, with members and viewers all over the world, it could be early morning for some and late night for others. So I'd better just say good day or hi. Anyway, welcome to the British Interplanetary Society's second live streamed Q&A session. I'm pleased to say that everything worked well last week until the last 5 minutes. Some of you may have missed the last question when the YouTube link fell over. However, I'm reliably informed by people who know about these things that if it should happen again, you should just click on the same URL or link and rejoin the session at more or less the same time, same point. Now, on tonight's program, I hope you've all had the chance to watch Dr. Warner's excellent talk on the manuals that saved Apollo 13. Though as a second-year aeronautical engineering student back in 1970, I remember listening to much of it live. I found Michael's talk fascinating and much more revealing. We already have a number of questions, but if you have any more, please email them to me as soon as possible on streaming@bis-space.com. I'm pleased to say we have Dr. Michael Warner with us tonight to answer your questions. Michael is the owner of a substantial collection of Apollo historic artifacts, and I now am going to hand over to him to introduce himself and possibly explain how and why he started this amazing collection. Over to you, Michael.
Alistair, thank you very much for the kind introduction. Good evening, good morning, and good day to everyone out there. Yes, my name is Michael Warner. I'm just going to introduce myself briefly and then take the questions. So the collection of Apollo mission artifacts, and there are some Russian artifacts as well, are all declared. They're all online, and the final few seconds of the presentation you've watched would have had that website if you wish to go there. And all the provenance is up there as well. So a bit of background. What's the interest? Well, I was around. I was 6 years old when man landed on the moon. I do remember the landing. We all sat on the floor in assembly watching on the black and white screen. So I remember that well. And then I was fortunate enough to build a business and sell it and had a bit of fun with some of the proceeds. And this was about 10 years ago. And the first acquisition, and this is all at the auction, or most of it's at the auction, was Apollo 15 star chart. And it just sort of excited me to have something, or to be custodian of something that had been on such an amazing voyage. And it just sort of took my interest. I have a very good friend of mine, some of you will know him, he's presented at BIS as well, called Mark Yates. And him and I have had a ball the last 5 years, just chatting and sharing what we do and what we collect. And if he's out there, Mark, then do send a question in. But it's been an amazing trip. And for me, the attraction is largely the research that goes into discovering the stories behind each of the artifacts. So if I purchase a new one, then I will search the NASA archives, the audio, the transcript, the video, and the story that lies behind it. And I hope some of that story came across in the presentation you just watched. So very happy to be here. Look forward to your questions. Alistair, back to you.
Right, well, thank you very much. If I may, I'd like to ask the first question, which really follows on from what you've just been saying, because I was amazed to see how different the Earth window mid-course correction burn sequence was in the Apollo 13 movie compared to the calm, almost clinical way in which it was actually carried out. Were there any other sequences in the movie that were that far out from what actually happened?
So that's a good question. I'm going to answer it, but I'm just going to talk a little bit more about the Earth in the window scene that you mentioned, because there is, if you remember the presentation I showed you, you were listening to the air to ground communication recording and reading the transcript. Now, there is, and that sounded fairly calm, and periods of silence when they were doing the time procedures. There is, of course, an onboard recording somewhere. Now, I've not found that, And I don't know if the onboard recording, hot mic, cold mic, was cold mic, but the recording was as frantic as the movie. I suspect not. I suspect that what we heard was pretty much what it was like. So it is rather different. The other point, I think, is that when Tom Hanks says, by the way, I've got the procedure here, why don't we just line up with the Terminator? The procedures were not coming from the astronauts predominantly. They were coming from all the teams and the contractors lying behind mission control, which is what makes that Apollo 13 contingency checklist so interesting, is that it's just like it's the conduit, it's the end of the funnel where all of the new procedures that were improvised were coming in and then channeled up to the astronauts. Now, to answer your question directly, I came up with two that I thought probably were a bit off the mark in terms of movie versus reality. I'm not sure there was a lengthy discussion about the free return trajectory. I'm pretty sure they decided that really, really rapidly, as that was going to be by far the easiest. They were heading in that direction. They knew how to do a slingshot, and they had tested out the dock dips burn of the descent engine before. So I doubt if that was quite such a debate as we saw in the movie. And the second one was the 6-minute blackout on splashdown. Now, my understanding from researching that is that they did know it was going to take longer than normal because of the more shallow entry trajectory that they were on. It seems unlikely that they were given the precision that they all work and the triple check-in on the slide rules that, it's 2 minutes longer than we thought. It just doesn't seem credible. But these are just my conjecture based on my reading. I could be wrong, I could be right. It's one of the greatest movies of all time, and I don't want to be despairing the movie. I think it stands up pretty well, and a lot of it is historically accurate.
Well, thank you. I must admit it was a brilliant movie. I remember first seeing it on plane on my way out to Indonesia, so it was quite a night. Right, well, thank you very much. I've got question number 2 is from Keith Burrell, Fellow of the British Interplanetary Society, and he asks, what happened to the subsequent Apollo moon missions CO2 scrubbers? Compatibility issue between the command and service module and the lunar module canisters.
So, Keith, thank you for the question. I interpreted that question as meaning, look, if they realized that they should have had redundancy and had compatibility between those two types of scrubbers and their connectors, did they carry forward that compatibility into the next design of the craft? It seems logical that they would have done. I saw this question come through earlier. I did a bit of research. Keith, I'm so sorry, I can't find the answer. I don't know, but it seems logical to me that they wouldn't make the mistake twice, that they were very good at building in redundancy, plan B, plan C, plan D. It's why they got back home. So I can't see why they wouldn't have built compatibility into the future missions. But I don't have the precise answer for you. I'm sorry.
Well, thank you. I expect we'll all go off and see if we can find that answer, but not easy. Right, another question from Keith Burrell, and he's saying, what happened to the lunar module with its life-saving CO2 scrubber canister adapter after the Apollo 13 crew and command capsules separated from the lunar module? Okay,
so I've realized I've answered that one in the previous answer. So I'm going to swap them around. I apologize, Keith. So that previous answer was to this 3-1. I'm going to interpret your other question as sort of what happened to the Apollo mission, the lunar module. Okay, so the lunar module, the command module, of course, separated from the service module, and the command module came back to Earth. The lunar module, which was supposed to be sitting on the moon's surface, didn't come back. About an hour before re-entering Earth, they de-docked from the lunar module and it drifted off into space. And I don't know if you can see behind me. I think you can. There is a picture there, up there, of that moment just after it's de-docked. Now, what I do have a little story that is quite interesting, and I hinted at it at the end of the presentation. And I'm taking a little bit of liberty, Keith, with your question, I know, but it's the one that I have a good story for. So it's what happened to a small part of the lunar module, the rest of it breaking up in the atmosphere. But there was one part which was designed not to break up in case during launch, they had to abort, and the lunar module was then re-entering post-launch, so I think in Earth's orbit, and the lunar module would end up coming back into the Earth's atmosphere and breaking up. And that was a plutonium flask that would be pulled out from the side of the lunar module on the surface of the moon, inserted into the SNAP-27 unit, which was the power unit for the next 10 years for those experiments. And of course, that had to withstand the breaking up of re-entry of the lunar module in an emergency situation, which this was not one they'd specifically planned for, but it worked. And we know it worked because the collection I have has a memo, and the memo is from the Atomic Commission, and they've been flying immediately after the landing. They'd flown air sampling helicopters over the trajectory to see if that capsule had broken up in the atmosphere. They didn't find any radiation in the atmosphere. Therefore, they assumed that it had behaved as designed, had worked a bit like a bomb. You can see, if you look at the presentation, you can see the diagram saying tumbling state, then stable state. It's a bit like a bomb coming out of a bomber. It tumbles and then it steadies. And it's, as I said in the presentation, it's somewhere 10 kilometers down in the ocean, in a trench, 200 miles south of the Fiji Islands. There is another piece in the collection. I'll do a quick version. Please go to the website, have a look, which is a memo from Eugene Kranz defending their communications with the craft on all the consumables. And that is a fascinating story, because if you read between the lines, basically he's being criticized for not keeping the astronauts up to date on each of their 5 main consumables. And he pushes back and says, yes, we did. But actually, NASA management looked like they're right. They hadn't done a good job. So I haven't really answered your question, apart from to end it by saying very little of the lunar module came back. It doesn't seem that the canisters came back. That's not mentioned in the list of items that were salvaged. But what was salvaged is up here. It's a large piece of netting, and there was a series of salvaging going on, a range of objects which were salvaged. They didn't mention the canister, but it was the hand controller that Jim been using, the PLSS name tags, food bags, and the inner wall netting material. And this is Fred Hayes speaking. I don't think Jim liked the pinging noise as I pulled loose the metal snaps holding the material to the outer wall. And then that netting was chopped up into small pieces and given as thank you plaques to a lot of the NASA employees and the contractors. So it's not a perfect answer, Keith, to your question, but it's the best I have.
Well, thank you very much for that. I think we're learning more and more as you go on. Right, I've got question number 4 here from Mike Lawford, a member of the Society and living in Harpenden. And he says, do you know how Jim McDivitt and Charlie Duke stored their copies of the manuals in the years they had them in their possession? During that time, do you know if they got them out to look through them themselves or to show other people? Do you flick through them often yourself?
I can answer some of that, Mike. First of all, you're from Harpenden, and I'm from Harpenden. That's where I come from. And my mum is still there. Her name is June Warner. If you know June Warner, she seems to know everybody in town. Please say hi to her. So, Mike, nice to have you on the live feed. The best answer I have for that one is the Jim McDivitt, the Apollo 9 manual, which is, where's it gone? This one here. Because that was bought directly from him, and I have the photos of him signing it, so I can deduce that, or we can deduce that it's unlikely that he hadn't signed it earlier. He probably and it had stayed in his collection for these 45 years. And my guess is that a lot of the material you see didn't come out until about 2012, when the Act was passed in the Senate and the House of Representatives, giving ownership and therefore sales rights to the Apollo, Mercury and Gemini astronauts only of artifacts, quote unquote, given to them by NASA. That then created a flurry of auctions because suddenly it was all legal, or at least not dubious. There is material that's come out, artifacts earlier, but there was always a debate about whether they were allowed to sell it or not. But 2012, they were allowed to sell it. So I would suspect a lot of this material was not flicked through, was just left, cozied up, you know, at the top of the wardrobe, and came out after 2012. Not all of it, but quite a lot of it. Myself, well, I don't sit there flicking through it while I'm watching telly. I do occasionally. I've certainly been going through it to research for this presentation and else. I took photos of every single page so that I can just refer to those online. But no, I treat them like historic manuscripts to be cared for. I am their guardian, I'm not their owner, and they will go back probably to the US one day, you know, in about 10 years' time. But I'm having just way too much fun at the moment researching them and sharing them. But no, I treat them with great care. I don't do a lot of flicking through, no.
Well, thank you. I'm on to another question, actually, from Mike Lawford again. And he says, what are the manuals made from? Are they just normal paper pages and ring binders? And were the copies flown in the Apollo spacecraft made from different material to the ground-based copies?
Well, I think that's a great question. I'm so sorry I don't know the answer. I can give this response. They are in ring binders, the manuals I have. They're quite 3 little ring binders. You might be able to just see them here. That there might be lighter versions in the spacecraft does seem to make sense. I don't sense that that is the case. It is interesting to us listening to how SpaceX and the other manufacturers now are looking. It's all weight. Well, they seem to be piling tons of material up on the Saturn V rocket. So the weight of the lithium hydroxide canister, and I don't know if Alan's going to shoot me, but I'm just going to tip that. Can you see that there? That's a ground test lithium hydroxide canister. It weighs a ton. When it arrived, I thought it was going to be about 1 kilogram. I would say it's 4 kilograms. So if they're going to pile that sort of weight of material up there, I'm not so sure they would seem to be worrying so much about having a slimmer version of the manuals. What they're made of, I don't know. And if Mark Yates is out there, it's the sort of thing he knows, and he can just send Alistair the answer. But yeah, they're in ring binders. I would suspect, I'm guessing, that it's the same material, the same that was on the ground and in the crafts. But I could be wrong. Please, someone else advise us if I'm wrong. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Michael. We're stretching you a bit. Right. Well, actually, I've now got one from our man himself, Alan Marlowe, from sunny Milton Keynes. Don't know whether it's still sunny there now. But he's saying, which checklist did the Apollo 13 astronauts cannibalize to make the lithium hydroxide adapter?
So I saw these questions coming and going, well, I don't know. But what could I respond that was would add a bit of value to that question? So it's a good question. I don't know. But here's a perspective I do have. Presumably Apollo 13, by the time they got to that stage, which was on the route home, they had given up on the mission to land on the moon. So there would have been manuals that were now clearly redundant. So it would be those manuals, I would have thought. There is another perspective on these manuals, and it's interesting as a collector. So this Apollo 9 manual is flown. It is heavily annotated. I think it's quite likely, I can't say categorically, the heaviest annotated of all Apollo manuals, or close to it. Why? Because it was a test flight. Apollo 9 was an all-up test flight. Once you get to Apollo 13, a fair few of the manuals would they wouldn't have not been used just because they didn't land on the moon. But let's say Apollo 17, they didn't need a lot of the manuals. It was being automated by mission control. So Apollo 17, for example, going to navigation directory, went up for auction. I acquired it. And it was never opened. It was on the lunar surface, but it was never opened because they didn't need it. They didn't need to reference it. They would have done it if there'd been an emergency, but they didn't need to. So what I'm getting at is there will have been manuals that were redundant because Apollo 13 didn't land on the moon. And increasingly, as the missions went on, the value of the manuals became less because they didn't need it. The missions had worked reasonably well, 14, 15, 16, and 17. So as a collector, you're looking for handwritten annotations of the procedures that have flown and or from mission control. And that a manual was on the moon and but not used. It's fascinating that you're looking at an object that was on the moon, but that it wasn't used in situ on the moon then reduces its value, to me anyway. Thank you, Alistair.
Well, again, thank you very much for looking at that one. Alan's asked another one, actually. Just wondering if you've got the answer to this one. Do you know if astronauts, cosmonauts, or taikonauts still use physical checklists, or is it all digital now?
So, you know, it's a question I wouldn't, well, now it's going to be all digital, I should think. Now, what I did do is, I don't know anyone from SpaceX, and I am not in touch with people from the shuttle program, but I do have a very good friend who is a British Airways captain. So it's a rubbish answer, but it's the best one I got. I just phoned him up half an hour ago and I said, what do you do? You know, it's 2020. What do you have? And he said, we do have physical manuals. We have a quick reaction handbook and fire manuals. So the absolutely critical ones we have right next to us, right here, and they're physical and they're manual, and we sit them between us and we work our way through them. So I'm just making that comparison. It could well be that the missions going up, I think there's the first manned mission, isn't there, to the ISS from the US soil going quite soon. You know, that may well have a few, you know, emergency and contingency manuals. However, he said, no, everything else is on the iPad. Now, of course, I'm talking to a BA flight, long haul 777. I have no idea if that matches onto current space flight, but it seems, you know, the principles are in that story. Most is on an iPad or is electronic, but the really critical ones might well still be physical.
Yes, I agree with you. I think having everything on paper is a great backup when everything else packs in and the batteries run flat. So everything of mine is on paper. I learnt my lesson. Right. Yeah, we've got two more questions, actually, from one, in fact, both from Les Shoulder. He's a member of the British Interplanetary Society, and he's still on the London-Essex border. You obviously haven't moved over the last week then, Les. Right. This is an interesting one. If your fairy godmother was to grant you one wish, what Apollo artifact would you most like to add to your collection?
I love this question, Les. So I had great fun with this. So I just sat there umming and ahhing, and I came up with two. Okay. So one is something I did try to bid for and luckily didn't get, because my wife, I think, would have left me at that point. And that is a main tire from a flown shuttle. Okay. It's wider than, you know, it would have filled up the whole of the lounge that I'm in. So luckily I'd fallen asleep, but I didn't press the button, so I didn't get that one. But that would have been quite fun, just a fun physical thing. But I think probably the answer to your question is the Apollo 11 timeline book, which on the anniversary, or around the anniversary of the landing of Apollo 11, was up for auction at Christie's for $9 million. It didn't sell, but it's a fascinating manual, and it sat, or it hung on a Velcro strap between Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin during the landing, and it has annotations in when the lunar module goes into orbit and starts its descent, and they're writing some annotations. So you can't really get closer to the historic event than that, or can you? And I add that coda for a bit of fun. So I saw that on sale, and I have in my collection, and I'll probably offer a presentation at BIS for Apollo 17. And I wrote to the Times, and it's quite, I don't know how long I've got. I'll try to do it in 30 seconds. So it's the answer really is saying I already have one of the things I've always wanted, and it is the rock manifest, with the written weights and locations of the largest haul of rocks of any of the 6 missions that landed on the moon, which is Apollo 17. And it's a single card, and it just has it written, and it's smothered in stained moon dust, because you can choreograph the filling in of those numbers at the end of EVA 1, EVA 2, EVA 3 with the photo of Eugene Cernan covered in dust and the audio archive recording and the transcript, and you can pull the whole lot together into a space of about 30 seconds and realize that everything was going on at the same time. He'd taken off his gloves, taken off his helmet, filled out the card, read out what he was doing, cross-checked it I've forgotten the name now, the geologist, and Harrison, and I have that. So I wrote to the Times saying, Christie's may say they have the most historic artifact, but I beg to differ. Now, it was tongue-in-cheek. Of course, it's not comparable by value or status, but it was a fun letter to write. And lo and behold, once in my life, I got a letter into the Times.
Fascinating. I think, yes, that's obviously something everyone wants. You'll have to make sure you hang on to that one. Right. I've got another one from Les.
Okay.
Still on the London-Essex border. Are there any known items listed on the manifest, etc., that were returned to Earth on Apollo missions that have since disappeared from public view? If so, would you like to speculate on why that might be and what missing artifact you would most appreciate being returned to the light of day?
Okay, so I have no evidence for this, but I would strongly suspect there's quite a bit missing. I can't say what. I haven't done the research to say what. Why is because these items were being traded before the Act of 2012. And so until then, it was not clear whether it was legal. And in fact, it was probably illegal to trade those things. And there was an attempt by NASA to go to court and get back an item. It was a cuff checklist that had been on the surface of the moon. I can't remember which Apollo mission it was that had traded, I feel like $850 million. And they said, no, you can't, you can't do that. That belongs to NASA. Now, I don't know what happened in that specific court case, but it obviously stirred up a movement that led to this new act. So I would suspect there are quite a few items in collections that had been traded prior to 2012, which have disappeared for the risk factor of the owner not knowing if they were allowed to have them. But I do have a better answer. So I did a bit of research on the Goodwill moon rocks, and I was staggered. I did know that I thought I'd heard once that Honduras had lost the rock given to it by Nixon, who gave a piece of the moon rock from Apollo 11 and some of it from Apollo 17 to each of the states in the US and each nation in the world. And the Honduras one went missing. I looked it up just now, and of the 270 Goodwill moon rocks given to what I just said, the states and the countries of the world, 180 are unaccounted for. 180. I thought it was going to be 3, So Honduras is the famous one. Some American Florida businessman obviously bought it off someone in the government of Honduras, sold it, and then it was seized by the feds from the Bank of America, from a vault, and it spent 5 years in a civil lawsuit, ended up going back to Honduras, and I read via NASA, who refurbished it. How? Refurbished it? So what, they polished it up and broke off a few more specs? I don't know. I just think that's quite funny. And there is a BBC documentary called Moon for Sale, which I have not seen, but I will watch it soon. So that's the best answer I can give to that one. Thank you, Les.
Right. Well, the emails are coming flooding in. Sadly, the first one was from Keith Burrell, who said he couldn't watch anything because someone pinched the BT cable last night, I think. So we better tell him to it'll be on the live stream later, and he can watch the answer then. I'll just tell him how to find it. Right, I've got a new one in now from Nigel Fudge, and he's a fellow of the Society. And again, he starts by saying, brilliant as usual, a presentation where you bring space, science and technology alive. always enjoy your talk. So thank you, Michael. That's just what he was saying. And the question is, was the propellant in the thrusters consisting of hydrazine or similar chemical, brackets quad thrusters for pitch, yaw, and roll?
Whoa, okay.
Too technical.
A great question and a very BIS question, but I that's out of my landscape. I'll just refer you back to my good friend Mark Yates. If he's out there, he can write. His dad was an aeronautical engineer, and so I'm sure there are perhaps there are people watching this who know that. I really just don't know. I think it's a very good question. It seems that there might need to be something different about it. What the only hint is, I do know that, when you're using the main descent engine, you do this ullage thing where you sort of it just shakes the craft and gets the fuel up to the end of the nozzle, and perhaps they don't need to do that if they're just using thrusters, which would suggest that it's a different mix. I don't know. It's a great question. I'm sorry, it's out of my league.
Well, yes, we can't know it all. Yeah, we'll get Mark back at some point to answer that one.
David Baker. David Baker.
Well, David would probably be another one to answer that one. Right, I've got a question now from Ange, and Ange says another big hello. And Michael, you refer to your collection being declared. What does that actually mean, and does that make your collection more valuable?
Well, hi, Ange. Nice to get a question from you. No, I made up that word, declared. I have seen in other collections people say that. I'm using that word to be clear to everybody. There is nothing clandestine. There is nothing in this collection that I wish to hide because, for example, I purchased it before 2012, or it's bought from someone where the provenance is weak. I have put everything, and I mean everything that I have purchased in the collection online. It's not 80% there, it's 100% there. I've put up all the provenance I could find relating to it, not just the certificates of authenticity, but there's other letters and materials that support the document. So it is a made-up word, but I'm trying to give the impression, I'm also trying to give a signal to other collectors, which is don't hoard this stuff, not because necessarily you're doing something untoward, but we are not really owners of this stuff. We are custodians, okay? If you own the lyrics to Help, you don't really own those. They belong to the people of Liverpool and the people of, you don't really, I don't believe you own this stuff. I think you are custodians for a period of time, and we should tell. I even phoned up when I bought the Apollo 17 rock manifest. I got in touch and spoke to the director of archives at NASA. And I said, I have it. I want you to know where that is. There are only 6 of them in the world. 3 have gone missing. 1 other is in private hands and 1's in Smithsonian. So don't you think you ought to know where it is? So he said, thank you. So that's what I mean by declared. I would like to encourage all other collectors to just put it out there so other people can read it. We can all enjoy looking at the objects, and we all know where they are as much as possible.
Right, well, Ange goes on and actually probably asks a more difficult question. Secondly, how much is your entire collection insured for?
Okay, and then so what's the next question, Alistair, after this one? Thank you, Ange. I'm not going there.
Let's move on. Let's move on. Right, I have another one just lined up here, so let's get on with that one. And it is, from Rick Mulhan. And he's saying, Mike, you have a superb collection of flown artifacts. Is there anything that you are particularly keen to acquire? And can you share what it is? Now, you partly answered that one. I'll let you try again.
Well, I can give a better answer. I do want to just apologise to Anne. And we're good friends, and I was a bit curt to your answer. I just prefer not to get into the the money type question. It's a hobby. It's a chunk of my pension, and I will sell it all back one day and buy my yacht. But anyway, it's a little dingy thing about this thing. So to question, yes. So for a while, I've been thinking that there is one type of item missing from the collection, and there is a sort of a hierarchy. It's not necessarily a value hierarchy, because some different parts of the hierarchy can be lower but worth more. But it roughly goes, was the artifact, did it ever leave the Earth? Was it only used in training or testing? Did it leave the Earth's, did it go into Earth's orbit? That would be the next level up, so Apollo 9. Did it go round the moon? And you have to look very carefully when you're purchasing these things. It says flown to the moon, and they usually mean flown around the moon and back, but not to the lunar surface. So that's the next level down. Is it something that landed on the lunar surface? And then the last one, and the answer to the question is, up until recently, there was nothing in the collection that had actually been outside of the lunar module. Now, I'm not unhappy about that, because I've got the rock manifest, which is impregnated with dust. You're not allowed to own lunar material other than it being impregnated on something else. You're not allowed to own moon rocks or soil. So it's an unbelievable document, and I look at it from time to time and just stand and stare in awe at it. But I have recently dipped again into my pension pot and bought a small item that was actually on the lunar surface, and it is in transit somewhere at the moment, I hope, or probably stuck in customs. It is the communication connector on a Dave Scott's Apollo 15 spacesuit, and it was about here. And I always try to make sure that I've got the story and the evidence before I acquire something to help bring the artifact to life. And so before I purchased it, I found live footage of him stepping off the ladder of Apollo, 15, Dave Scott. And he passes the camera and you can see it. So that for me, that's the wow factor. And then you've got 3 days worth of footage, video footage and still footage of him on the lunar surface doing the experiments, loads of images of that connector. And then there'll be a whole story behind that about the Genesis stone. And his suit is in the Smithsonian Museum in DC, and I've actually seen it. And I looked on my iPhone. I was there a year ago, and I went back over my photos and saw the photo I'd taken of Dave Scott's suit and could see where the connector went. So for me, that piece ticks the final box of having something that was actually on the lunar surface, and I have a personal relationship to it because I saw where it originally came from, and I had the archive footage to go with it as well. So that's the truthful answer to the last question.
Well, thank you. You've got the rabbit out of the hat, I think. Right, I've got actually an answer to one of the questions here, because Rick Mulhern actually says, Mike, for the record, the flown manuals were made from fire retardant paper, one of the prerequisites following the Apollo 1 fire review. So that gets that one out the way. Well done, Rick.
Thank you.
Right, I'm going to move on to another question here. And it's from, just trying to see who I've got here. I've got one from Russ Palmer, a fellow of the British Interplanetary Society in Essex. And he says, after blackout has been completed during re-entry of CM, there was a very long delay between Houston and the astronauts establishing radio communication. Do you know the cause of it? Why was there such a long delay before the astronauts said anything?
The only answer I have is the one I gave before, and that's only because I've read it in Lovell's book, and that was the angle of trajectory was not the normal angle. I don't know anymore, and therefore they were anticipating it longer to come through. But that wasn't the question. The question was the communication. Why did the communication take longer? I don't know. The only thing I can think of is if it's a shallower angle, or I think they sometimes come in and they pop back up again and then they come down and pop, but they can almost steer it with the shield, because that's partly why the shield is that shape, and they may have stayed up there longer so that the average trajectory was more shallow. And if that's the case, well then that's which is the ionized effect around the capsule was hanging around longer than normal because of the average longer, shallower trajectory. But I am purely guesstimating here. There are people in the audience, I'm sure, that know much more about this than I. But that would be my best guess.
Right. Well, thank you. I've got Rick Mulhern back again, and this is a question I think you may have already answered. Mike, what do you intend doing, if anything, with your choice flown pieces? Will they end up as a museum donation?
Okay, that's good. Okay, well, I'm going because I haven't actually decided yet. So that's the truthful answer. It is a chunk of my pension, so I do need to sell a reasonable amount of it back at some point. So that's how I justify purchasing it. Well, it's an asset, and one has to spread one's pension pots in different piles. And so this piece is to do with the collection. It's an asset. It may lose value, it may gain value, probably going to lose value, but at least it's got some value wrapped up in it. So I'm not wealthy enough to say, well, that's just a free asset that I can give away. I've got to sell it back for my pension. But I will probably pass a couple of items down to my family, 2 of them, for custodianship again. I have thought, I'm not sure about giving it to a museum. I'm happy to take advice on that. It would have to be the right museum. If there was a museum where I had a very strong connection and I knew it would be looked after well, and more than that people would come and see it, then I can see that might be an option, particularly writing it in a will. If I was to pass away earlier, it would say, well, look, I've gone now. I don't need the pension money. My family are okay. If this happens, then it goes to this museum. What I'm enjoying and what I think is helping is I'm going out. I'm taking the exhibition out to schools and to businesses, and I intend to do more of that as I wind down my working career. So I see myself 10 years enjoying this collection, researching it, and then going out and talking about it. And I probably nearing the end of building the collection. I can't keep justifying a new expenditure in my head. So I'm probably at the end of the purchasing, but I've got 5-10 years worth of taking it out there in the world and sharing it. After that, don't know, but it's a good question. I will give it more thought.
So we can put in our bids now, can we?
Not yet, soon.
No. Okay. Actually, Rick's come back with a bit of a statement here. He says that the issue that sparked interest from the US State Department when it went to auction was a 16mm DAC movie camera that Ed Mitchell tried to sell about 2010. He was taken to court, but the case was eventually dropped when he returned the camera to NASA. All charges were dropped so long as each party paid their own legal expenses.
Good. Okay. I hadn't heard that one. I had heard about the $150 million cuff checklist. What I've obviously not remembered is the story behind it. So yes, well, look, if it's 2010, I would suspect that incident then contributed to the 2012 Act by the sound of it. I mean, that's too much of a coincidence if it's only 2 years away and that was the main controversy.
Right. Well, I'll ask everyone now if there are any more questions to please get them in. I think I'm on my last one here at the moment. So we've been going our 45 minutes, but we can go for an hour if people have got more questions. Right. This one is from Edward Zigoy. Yeah. And he's saying, are you aware that the star chart was used to train Apollo astronauts containing the unofficial star names of Navi, Regor, and Denosis, which are the backwards words to honor the Apollo 1 crew?
Oh, that's good. No, I didn't. I love stories like that. So I love that story. On the honoring the Apollo 1 crew, I have another little story like that, which is that in this manual here, if you open up the second page, has now you've got me thinking. I wonder if these two things are linked. There's a picture of the celestial bodies, stars, and on it, gosh, I'm going to look after this. On it are ringed 3 stars, one for Ed, one for Gus, one for, I can't remember who the other one was. So I wonder if they are those stars. So now I need to look to see if the wording of those stars is the back to front wording. That's a fascinating piece of information.
Well, yes, he actually goes and he says Navi for Virgil Grissom, Regor for Roger Bruce Chaffee, and Gnosis.
Shall we have a look? Do you want to have a look? Shall we have a look?
Yeah, if you can.
But hang on.
We'll ask everyone to hold on. Go have a cup of tea.
No, it's going to be really quick. It's going to be really.
Right.
It's just I'm only hesitating because I'm using my hands.
Oh, right.
So I'm just going to. So in here, I'll try and hold it up. I'll just see if I can find it. But I don't know if I can.
Well,
just a second. Let me find the chart first, and then just give me 10 seconds.
Yeah.
Ad-lib, Alistair. Ad-lib.
Yeah, well, I'm about to, but in fact, we can watch your back.
Oh, I'm sorry, but there it is. Right, I found it quickly. Okay, so there is the star chart that I was just talking about in this manual, Apollo 9 manual, and it has in there, can you just read out what you had before, the three names?
Navi for Virgil Grissom.
Okay, it's there.
Regor for Roger Bruce Chaffee.
There.
And Denosis for Edward White.
That's it. So it's got Denosis, one for Ed. It's got Mirfat. No, it's got Navi, one for Gus. One for Gus, one for Ed. Oh, and then it's got Rigor.
Yeah, I'm trying to read them on my phone, which I need a bigger screen.
I'm going to hold it up steady, and I know no one's going to be able to see it, but you just never know. So.
Wow.
That's fantastic. I love stuff like that.
There we are. Thank you very much, Edward. We've actually got the answer to one of the questions that was never asked. So that was great. Now, I'm looking quickly to see if I've got any more questions here. Just let me have a quick look. Oh, yes. Ange has just put another one. Let's see if I've got that one. Michael, thank you for the mention and not to worry about his flippant response. Well done, Ange. All the best. Right. Oh, I've got one from Russ Palmer again. Great talk. When the CM is returned to NASA and they clean the capsule out, did they find any contamination from moon dust or bacterial elements?
Well, I don't know, because you're talking about Apollo 13. Well, it can't be, because you can't have moon dust if it's Apollo 13. So
no, it
must be general. Well, there'd be moon dust, I'm sure, because they would have transferred from the lunar module to the command module, and dust would have come through. I'm pretty sure about that. Contamination. Well, didn't they work out that there wasn't anything? Because the first Apollo 11 and Apollo 10, they were all quarantined, weren't they, for quite a while. And then I'm not sure at which mission they realized that there wasn't any need to quarantine them. So that was the bacterial type issue. But on Apollo 13, well, there wouldn't have been any lunar dust because they didn't go anywhere near the moon. But other missions, I'm sure there was lunar dust brought back into the command module. Would be quite impossible not to have brought some back in. I mean, if they were salvaging and they had procedures to salvage items that I read out to you, and it's up here, if they had procedures to salvage from Apollo 13, those procedures were written before the crisis. So presumably they had procedures to salvage items from the lunar module before, including the spacesuits, because we know that because it's standing in the Smithsonian Museum in DC. So yes, there would have been moon dust in the command module.
Right. Well, thank you very much. Now I've got one more question from Rick, and I think it's almost personal. Mike, any plans to take your collection on tour anywhere north of Watford, i.e. Merseyside?
Send me an email, invite me, and I'll come. Right,
there you are, Rick. You've got to get the invitation out as soon as possible, and you're ready to go.
Well, right. Find a more genuinely, not a house. Find a school or a college, and some genuine interest, or a satellite company or something like that. Find a legitimate and genuine interest who would want to see these artifacts. And yes, I'll get in a car and drive up. Yeah. Not at the moment. Yeah. In due course.
Yes, well, we all want to go heading off to the pub now, but it's not going to be possible for a while, I think. Right. Well, thank you very much for this chance to chat with you. I think we've learnt a lot, as always, and I think we're almost better asking questions this way than to do it actually down at the BIS. Someone says that we might actually do this forever. So we will see. It saves me getting on a train. Right. Well, thank you very much. I've run out of questions. Oh, no, I've got another one from Mike Lawford just come in. Here he's saying, what does Michael's family think about his collection? Has it inspired them more about space?
Oh, I haven't told my wife yet. I have no intention. No, I mean, not my immediate family, really. But that's because, you know, they're teenagers and they do the opposite of what the parents do. But my wider family, yes, I have parts of my family that, you know, remember Apollo 13. My mum remembers Apollo 13, and there was a really lovely little story. So a lady in Henley on the moon landing anniversary, I did with David Baker. We did a double act in our town centre, outdoors. It was lovely, 500 people all watching. And Ange was there, I think, and Evans. And a little old lady came up afterwards and said, Apollo 13. She said, I remember Apollo 13. She said, I remember because I went out at 2 o'clock in the morning, and all the lights in the street were on. And I didn't understand why. It's because everyone was watching the last final hours of the landing of Apollo 13. So as a slight digression, the question was my family. So no, my immediate family, not yet inspired by it. My brother in Australia loves all this stuff. And then, yes, my extended family are pretty keen on it as well. My father, bless him, he's passed on, but he would have, what he did, he saw the first few items and then he passed, but he would have loved this. He was a he was built for BIS. You know, he had his New Scientist magazine and he was a bit of an astronomer and he loved space and stars. And it's a shame he's just never really got to see this collection grow, but he's with us in spirit.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you for sharing all this with us, because I think it's been an eye-opener. I think the research you do is fascinating in that you're able to do so much more in looking at the scripts and the transcripts and everything else at the same time, and looking at the movies too. So thank you very much for that. And I'm sure that we'll invite you back when we're all back down at the BIS, and you can bring some bits with you if they're not too valuable. And I'd like to end by thanking you very much on behalf of the British Interplanetary Society for doing this tonight, and look forward to doing it again. Now, actually, I've just got one more question. Oh, it's a many thanks from Les Shoulder. So we've got more emails coming in, but most of them are thanks. What I'd like to do now is actually just give you some warning that we're hoping to use some of our past videos in the next few weeks while shutdown is on, that we'll actually get permission from the speakers, and if possible, actually get them in to do a Q&A at the end, as we have done today. So that I'm working with Scott Hatton on that to try and get some of those ready to go. But the next one we're going to do live, we know, is the 6th of May, when we're going to get Mark Hempsall. He's done a video already, I'm told, and he's been talking about engineering the Scorpion. So that's on the 6th of May, again at the same time, and we'll put the video out a few days before so you get a chance to look at it. And then on the 10th of June, which actually hasn't been announced yet, but I think it will be on the website shortly, Chris Carberry is going to be talking about alcohol in space. So it's sad that we're not allowed to go out to the pub, but we'll probably all drink at home. And he's going to tell us how it has been done in the past and will continue into the future. So an interesting little write-up, and we'll learn all about that. I'm looking for another 2 or 3 more talks, which will be in July, September and October. And so we'll carry on this until we get back into the BIS, and then we hope to have some live talks again. So I wish you all well. Thank you very much for staying with us and listening to us. And we'll look forward to seeing you again, I hope, in the next few weeks. And stay safe and enjoy yourselves wherever you are. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.